we still use VHS tapes, and all of our music is in a radio. Our phones are big, and our hair is even bigger. With all these new great things coming out, I cannot wait for the future. With all these totally radical inventions, the future looks totally bodacious, man. In fact, my homie, Mark Strand, actually made a poem about the future, which is totally radical, which is why I'm going to bring my homie Mark Strand over to tell us about the poem. Sadly, Mark Strand has been famously dead for 7 years, but thanks to the new inventions in our technology industry in the 80s, we're able to communicate them from the dead with my new invention. First, I gotta set up my secret password. Bodacious! Now that everything's all set, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Strand!
Hello, my name is Mark Strand. I would have liked to be here in person, but due to the fact that I have been famously dead for 7 years, I could not personally attend this cinematic masterpiece of a film. So I will be speaking to you via a text-to-speech airwave. Anyways, my poem is called The Prediction. I created this back in the year 1979, and it goes like so. That night the moon drifted over the pond, turning the water to milk, and under the boughs of the trees, the blue trees, a young woman walked, and for an instant, the future came to her. Rain falling on her husband's grave, rain falling on the lawns of her children, her own mouth filling with cold air, strangers moving into her house, a man in her room writing a poem. The moon drifting into it, a woman strolling under its trees, thinking of death, thinking of him, thinking of her, and the wind rising and taking the moon and leaving the paper dark.
Thank you, Mark Strand. That poem was totally radical. Man, I can't wait to see what the future holds for us in 2021. We're going to be solving world hunger. There will be no pandemics because all the viruses are going to be eradicated, and we're going to have world peace. Man, the future looks so bright. I got to put all my other shades on, man.
Yeah, I think he's kind of off. The Prediction is a really interesting poem in my opinion. I think it does a really great job dealing with the concept topic of death, and its interpretation of it is quite interesting in my opinion. The poem starts with a regular stroll in the evening, with the first stanza saying, "That night the moon drifted over the pond, turning the water to milk, and under the boughs and trees, the blue trees, a woman walked, and for an instant the future came to her." To me, it's supposed to kind of relate to a normal, average, everyday experience. But what makes this even better is the next paragraph that follows. Rain falling into her husband's grave, rain falling on the lawns of her children, her own mouth, filling with cold air, strangers moving into her house. The second stanza is the most interesting one for me because it delves directly into the topic of death and mortality, showing her own death along with her husband and children, and then showing a little bit of a glimpse on what the third stanza would say, which honestly completes the overall narrative the author wants to give behind. A man in her room, writing a poem, the moon drifting into it, a woman strolling under its trees, thinking of death, thinking of him, thinking of her, and the wind rising and taking the moon and leaving the paper dark. To me, the third stanza overall completes the idea, actively acknowledging the fact that she's thinking about death and her own mortality. But going beyond that, she also looks into the more deeper future. She looks at the man who would also be writing this poem, who might also be thinking of the people who have lived before her, and also thinking of the people who will live after them. I think it gets into an even deeper topic when it says it in the first line of the stanza. And taking the moon and leaving the paper dark. That line calls out the most to me because I think that line in itself signifies the idea that there is a greater plan, a greater purpose. The paper dark is supposed to be vague. It's really interpretive on what exactly it's meant to mean. But the thing about it is that I interpret it as the idea of a much greater picture, a much greater plan. While we as human beings live and die each and every day, I think we see a much more deeper, much more larger connection. And it's only when we look into the past that really becomes apparent. While Mark Strand talks about the topic of death, he's not entirely cynical about it. He gives this kind of loose hope about the future having a much bigger picture, about the world having a greater plan, a greater overall purpose, and in some way, one way or another, we're a part of it. And I think that calls out to me. I think we as human beings like looking into the future a lot. We love the idea of looking out there and knowing what exactly will happen, predicting what will happen in the next 100, 1,000, or billion years. But in reality, only one thing is ever guaranteed: our own mortality. And at the end of the day, it's the greater message the author wants to give. Mark Strand's focus on mortality is emphasizing the idea of the simple thought of it. What will happen after us? What will go on? While we may not know exactly what will happen, it is simple to know that our mortality will come soon. And it's really the change that we will give to the world. Because in some way or another, we are thinking of the people in the future, and the people of the future will think of us. So really, it's up to us whether or not we want to make an impact with it. And I think that's the part that personally calls to me the most in this poem. Our mortality. And the idea that we can still make the world a better place. We can still give the people after us a better tomorrow. And sometimes that can really only bluntly be done by remembering our own mortality. Sometimes it's a difficult concept to grasp, especially if it's your first time thinking of it. But I think over time you come to the acceptance of it. You come to realize your impact you really truly have on the world. And I think we should find it motivational to push ourselves forward, the same way Mark Strand has done.